That'd be fine.
Alright. I'm so happy to see so many of you out. Okay, in order to be great guests, I will expect earbuds out and attention on our guest speaker rather than on your phone and other things. I appreciate that. At the end of his presentation, he'll take a few questions. We're going to do prizes for the book. He's offered to sign the book he brought. We have about 6 of his books to give away and some Valley beanies and Valley hats. And then as you finally leave here, it is double stamp day. So you'll all get a double stamp. But I appreciate these students are all using their own time to learn more about the great and interesting things you have to share. Chris has been here a couple different times and we always appreciate him. He's great. Terry has the in with him, and Terry, why don't you finish your introduction?
All right.
What?
Now, I'm always on you guys about reading. And I talked to you just an hour ago about the importance of reading. All right, you're going to go on to school. You have to. I just got an email from a student of mine from a couple of years ago, and he says, Terry, why didn't anyone tell me how important reading is? I'm now in college, and I have to read all this stuff, and I'm really behind. Reading is important, and I love the title. All right, Chris is a former professor of mine. Yes, I had to go to school too. And Chris has taught me a great deal about reading, and I appreciate the work that he's done. So he's here to speak to you. Now, those of you who are in my class, yes, I have a ticket. So you have to see me after class. And because it's double stamp day, you get a ticket and you get your card stamped.
What a day.
There you go. Double bonus. So Chris is here. He's written several fascinating books. And this is, I guess he's going to talk about some of those.
I'll mention a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Good. So is this good enough? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm always glad to come here. And I like, Terry asked me to talk about reading. And so I said I would. So we'll see how this goes. I don't know if you've ever asked yourself this question, does reading matter? But when I was a student, and most students don't like the things that you do in school. And college is more of the same. But one of the things is when we study stuff that we don't choose to, that's one way we learn. If we only study what we're interested in ourselves, we wouldn't grow very much. And so sometimes forced reading is not a bad thing, it's just not a pleasant thing always. But it doesn't seem like it matters very much. But I would challenge you to think about any job or any career that doesn't require you to read. And it's pretty hard to come up with something because you got to read math, you got to read instructions, no matter what you're doing. There's written language involved in doing computer stuff, you got to read code. So it's an important skill, but then there's something beyond just the skill of being able to, 5-year-olds can look at letters and say them. But there's something beyond that as we mature and our brain is more sophisticated, we can do stuff besides just read simple symbols. So I know that not everybody loves reading. So I have 4 kids, 1 son, and he hates to read. And all through high, he's 32 now, and he's never read one of my books. And I gave him an audio version of one. He won't even listen to it. He just doesn't like to read. And his wife reads all the time. And he grew up in a house where his dad read books to him when he was little. Every night we read, when we went to bed, we read a book. We tell him stories. He was encouraged to read books. But something about his personality, he didn't see. He reads when he has to for work. So he's a banker, and so there's lots of stuff he has to read. But he doesn't read for pleasure. And is that a bad thing? I don't think so. I just think that there's something he's missing out on if he did read for pleasure. But he likes watching movies, and so that's okay. But that's my own son, so I get it that not everybody loves to read, and it's okay. You don't have to love it. But for me, it hasn't always been important. I mean, now my living is around reading. So I teach English and books, and I write books, and I read books, and all kinds of stuff. And so it's a pretty important part of my life, but it wasn't always that way. And so when I was a brand new kid, the fattest of my family, my main concern was being fed, right? That's a basic need. Then as I got older, my concern was how am I going to grow out of these horrible pictures that my mom's been taking of me as I was growing up. No teeth, too many teeth. But this is a picture I like of my brothers and me and my dad reading, and that's me right there. And my dad was a busy guy. He worked a lot of nights, and so we didn't always see him at night. But when he did come home, sometimes we would have a fight to see he could sit in his lap and he would read to us. I have really good memories of that. It wasn't that it happened a lot. But I just remember sitting in my dad's lap and he was reading some kind of Dr. Seuss book. That was kind of a nice memory. But in this picture, I think it's interesting that, when Dad's gone, I'm the one holding the book. And my other brothers are looking goofy, but they're not necessarily, well, Mike, this is my oldest brother Mike, he's got a book there, but they're occupied with something else. So this is a quotation from a writer I really like, this guy Richard Peck, who's written a whole ton of books. And this might sound offensive if you don't think you're a reader, but think about what he's saying here when he says only readers have futures, about what that might mean. It's not just in careers, but lots of things that you want to do. I mean, if you're going to be a parent, you've got to be able to read medical instructions for your baby. You've got to read tax documents when you file your taxes. I mean, your future's pretty bleak if you just can't read. So most all of you can read, right? I mean, you can read those words, so that's a good thing. And then there's ways to kind of move beyond that. So this is I'm showing a lot of family photos here, but this is when I was a teenager, and we look pretty nerdy. And you might think about the future that these nerds might have when they grow up. And here's kind of where we are. Among the 5 of us, our baby was my sister. We have 18 kids, and we have a bunch of grandkids. 13 college degrees, if you count all of us all together. There's 13 different degrees that we have, the 5 of us. My one brother was a college president, this guy. My little brother was an elementary school principal. I worked at a university. He was a high school teacher and football coach. And we've read thousands of books in our lifetimes, thousands of books. Now, it's not always fiction. It's not always the stuff that you would read in an English class. A lot of things my brothers read are about facts. So when my brother Mike was a coach, he read tons of books about football strategy, books written by football coaches, because he was trying to understand the game better as a coach so he could be a more successful coach. My brother Bill, when he was a college president, had lots of books to read about fundraising. How do you get people to donate to your college? Because that's what presidents do. Their job is to get people to donate money. How do you manage teachers? How do you run a big institution like a school? So he had things that he was learning, not because he had to. Nobody made him read those books. He chose to read them because they provided opportunities for him that he might not have had otherwise. So this is another nerdy picture. I've got lots of nerdy pictures. 8th grade with these great glasses. My kid can't even believe I would allow myself to wear those. But this is the first thing I can ever remember getting that said maybe you could be a reader. It was this kind of corny certificate in 8th grade, and I don't even remember why I got it. But it made me start thinking about maybe I'm more of a reader than I think I am. But the reason I didn't think I was a reader is that in my family, sports are all that matter. So we have 4 boys in my family. I have 3 brothers. All of us went to college on football scholarships. And if we hadn't had those scholarships, we wouldn't have gone. I don't think we could have afforded it. So we were lucky that we had this ability that we could find a way to get to school and somebody else pay for it. And in those years in junior and high school, sports were so important to us that school didn't seem very important, because being a good reader doesn't help to make a tackle or catch a pass or read the defense. It's just something you do in school. So it wasn't until later that I started thinking differently. But this is high school where I was all about football, track, more football. And things changed when I met this girl. She's sitting on the parking lot right now. Yeah. She's reading. She's reading. So this is our junior prom. And I grew up in this house with guys, and it was always about sports and stuff. And her mom was a professional cello player. And I don't know if you know anybody who's a professional musician, but they take their work really seriously. So the first time I went to her house, I went to the front door and I heard this, I didn't know it was cello music, but it was classical music, And I thought, well, somebody's listening to the radio, so I pound on the door, because I'm here to see Liz, And nobody answers, the music keeps playing. I pound on the door again, still music, nobody comes. Pound a little bit louder, the music stops. This woman comes to the door, she throws it open. What do you want? I couldn't believe this woman's yelling at me. I said, well, I'm here to see Elizabeth. And she said, don't you ever interrupt me when, she was giving a lesson or something. And she was a serious musician, and it was really a big deal for her. So Elizabeth grew up in a house with a mother who was a professional musician, but also in her house they had paintings because her grandmother on both sides and her great-grandmother were painters. One of her great-grandmothers was a famous poet in the United States in the 1920s. So in her house they had books written by people that they knew, family members, and paintings by family members. And in my house we had a TV where we watched sports, and we had trophies from my older brothers and stuff like that. So it was like these 2 different worlds. And when I started getting to know her better, I realized there's a different way of being. I mean, sure, you can be a jock and you can love sports and do that kind of stuff. But there's also a chance to live where your brain matters too, where it's not just your body, but it's your brain. And you can do things because you can think, not just because physically you can do stuff. And that's when I first started thinking, maybe I'm more than just a football player. Maybe there's something, some future that I might have besides the NFL, which wasn't going to be an option, I don't think, for me. So I did play football at BYU, and it was a great way to go to college, and there weren't any other guys in the team besides me that were English majors who really decided they loved to read and to write. And that was a weird transition for me of changing from being all about sports to thinking, okay, there's a time when my sports career is going to end. What am I going to do then? What do I want to do then? And I knew I wanted to do something that had to do with reading and writing, which leads to, this is my moment of glory, blocking this punt against Utah State. So I used to be able to jump in those days. So I became a high school English teacher, and this is a photo of my last day at the high school that I was a student at. So I went back to the high school I graduated from in Arizona, and I taught there for 10 years. And I loved it. I loved working with high school kids. I think it's a great time of life because you're right where life started to matter, because the decisions that you make will put you on a path that will lead to exciting things. And there are lots of path possibilities. You don't know where you're going to go. When I was your age, I didn't know where I was going to be. But it's great to be a teacher when around people in that time of life. So from there, I ended up getting a job at a university in Japan. So still teaching, but teaching Japanese students who all spoke English like me. But it was, because I was a reader and a writer, I had a chance to have that career. So this is my office up on the 7th floor. You can't see out the window very well, but there's these Japanese mountains. Japan is loaded with mountains in the background. But reading's taken me to lots of places. I don't know if you know where this is. Do you know where this is? It's the Boston Marathon finish line. So I can say honestly, I have crossed the finish line of the Boston Marathon. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But I didn't run it all. This is where that bomb was a year or so ago. But I've been to Boston because I'm a reader and a writer. I've been to Tonga. I don't know if you know where Tonga is in the South Pacific, but I've been to some tiny islands out in the South Pacific working on a book for 10 years and I haven't been able to figure out the book. I've been to New Zealand and all over the United States and to London and all these things simply because I really like to read and write and I work hard at it. And it wasn't something I ever dreamed of. I never had any desire to go to Tonga, but I'm really glad I've been there. I never had a desire to go to New Zealand or England, but I'm really glad I've been there. And so it was because of these skills. So I've written lots of different kinds of stuff. And a lot of writers, like you can talk to Brandon Mull, he's a great writer, but he writes one kind of thing. And that's great for him. But for me, I have lots of things I'm interested in. So I've written stuff for teachers, essays for people who are turning old, novels, another book for teachers. You know what language that is? Japanese. One way you can tell with Japanese, so this has nothing to do with reading, but these are Chinese characters, so Japan's language came from China, and the writing system's the same, so when they read these symbols, they pronounce them differently, but they're the same symbols. The difference between Japanese and Chinese is this stuff. This is called hiragana and katakana. So this is where it's like a phonetic where they sound things out. And so there's thousands of these characters that make no sense, but each of these sounds have a sound. The symbols have a sound, and so they can read anything if they write like that. So if you see symbols that are kind of curvy like this among Chinese characters, you know it's Chinese, you know it's Japanese. If there are none of these kinds of things, you know it's Chinese. So this is my name, Kuro. Oh no, here's my name, Kurisu Kuro. And this is Hikichi Tapio, the Japanese guy. Obviously, he wrote the Japanese stuff. One of the things I had a chance to do was to write a book about this African-American writer, Mildred Taylor, who's really a wonderful and incredibly smart woman. You know much about African-American history. You know that blacks in America had a rotten deal in the 19th century, the 1800s, after the Civil War. Her father was the son of a slave owner and a slave woman. And in 1880, he was able to buy land in Mississippi. And people hated him for that. This is her life story. People hated him for that because white people didn't want black people on land. But somehow he managed to do that, and the family has held on to that land in Mississippi all these years. Today, they still own it. So she's written a bunch of novels based on her family story, based on this man who ran away from the plantation after having a fight with his father, bought the land, fought to keep the land, white people tried to take the land during the civil rights movement, all this bad stuff was happening. She's brilliant. And I learned a lot about the world that I just didn't know, especially a lot about African American history. So one of the things I learned from her was about this kid named Emmett Till. How many of you have ever heard of Emmett Till? Yeah, way more than when I was your age. I didn't hear of him until a few years ago. So she was his age, and she was starting high school the same year Emmett Till was murdered. And she mentioned that she was nervous about starting high school because she was worried about going to this high school that was whites only until her first year there. And she would be one of the first black kids in that school. She was worried about how they would treat me. But she was also worried about her safety because of what happened to Emmett Till. And I didn't know what happened to Emmett Till, so I had to learn about it. So that led to a couple of books about him and what happened to him, this horrible murder. That led to a couple other books that, because I like to read and like to learn stuff, this guy, Thurgood Marshall, do any of you know what he's famous for? He's African American. Two really big things. One is he was the lawyer who, if you know the Brown versus Board of Education decision, the Supreme Court decision, that said you can't separate schools based on race. So before 1955, and especially in the South, they would have really horrible schools for black kids, where the teachers got paid half as much as white teachers. The schools had the books nobody else wanted. The schools were in bad shape. And Thurgood Marshall represented several black families who sued about that and took it all the way to the Supreme Court and won the decision that said American schools can't separate students, can't segregate students based on race. So the fact that you're in a school like you are today is partly due to a guy like Thurgood Marshall. And then this is a guy I had never heard about until I started learning the history of Emmett Till and Thurgood Marshall. Do you know who Larry Doby was? I never did. So you know Jackie Robinson was. He was the first black player in the modern Major League Baseball. He was in the National League. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. So just 6 weeks after Robinson came into the major leagues, this guy named Larry Doby came into the American League as the first black player there. He played with Cleveland. And nobody's heard of him because Robinson was first, got all the attention. He's in the Hall of Fame. He had a great career. But what's interesting to me about his story is I think he's the reason that we have integrated baseball now, that blacks and whites and Latinos play on the same teams. Not Robinson. Robinson started it, but when Jackie Robinson had a great first season, all the white owners were saying, he's a fluke. There are no other black players good enough to play in the major leagues. So we don't have to worry about any more black players coming in. We're just going to keep it white except for Robinson. But when Doby showed up, he proved that they were liars because he was as good as Robinson. And so suddenly the owners couldn't have this deal, this backroom deal where they decided to keep black players out. They had to admit that black players are good enough to play in the major leagues, and obviously they are. That's why I think Doby's so important. So he was somebody that people had forgotten about. It was fun to learn about him and write a book about him. So these books, this came from a completely different place, but still from my own reading and writing. And so it's set in 1968, which these magazines were all from 1969. Looking back even just a year later, Americans are like, wow, how did we survive 1968? It was a crazy year in American history. So the big thing that was going on in America in 1968 was the Vietnam War. And America, it had been going on for a couple of decades, but America got involved in like 1962 or so. A lot like the Middle East, when we went over to try to help somebody. But 68 was the worst year, so there are a lot of photographs like this. In January of 1968, the Viet Cong, those are the enemy there, used a surprise attack during a holiday called Tet in Vietnamese language, the Tet Offensive. And they surprised the Americans and South Vietnamese troops and slaughtered them all through the country. They were spreading their armies out in secret because nobody thought on the holiday, like Christmas for us, that they would go to war. And once they were spread through the country, then the day the holiday began, they launched their attack and they caught everybody by surprise. So hundreds of soldiers died during the Tet Offensive. This is a famous award-winning photograph. This guy's being executed in the streets of Saigon by the police chief because he had just murdered a couple people. He was a spy for the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. Those are the communists. And had snuck into a house and murdered women and some kids. And so they took him out in the street and shot him. So the big news that year was how many men died. So now if we hear news from Afghanistan or Iraq, we might hear that 3 soldiers were killed last week, or 1 soldier, or 10 would be a bad week. But during the Vietnam War in 1968, it was 300 or 400 or 500 soldiers were killed in a single week. So by the end of the year, 16,592 soldiers died in Vietnam. 16,592, 1 year. So that was more soldiers in all the years combined before that year, all the Vietnam War years. This was the worst. And I was just thinking about how horrible that was. I mean, I was in school. So when I was thinking about writing this book, I was trying to think, how can I honor these guys who fought and died? And it's kind of a long story. But I was thinking about, maybe I could structure the book in some way that helps us remember every single guy, without listing all their names, but to think about them all the time. So what I decided to do was to kind of use a different format. So the pages, you can see there aren't many words on the page. So that's the very first page of the book right there. And I started each chapter with the week, with the month and the year. So this is April 1969. So this is the beginning of the book for the kids looking back on the year that just passed, 1968. What do you think this number is? Where is it going to go? That number 204, what's that represent? What would it be? Yeah, it's the number of guys killed in Vietnam that week. And so he starts off by saying there's something tidy in 17 syllables. The haiku neatness that leaves craters of meaning between the lines but still communicates what matters most. So how many syllables does a haiku have? 5 in the first line, 7 in the second line, and 5 in the third line. How many is that? 5, 7, 17. So 17 syllables. So for the book, when I was thinking about using this kind of format, so here's the first chapter of 1968, I was thinking, what if I have the whole book made up of 1 syllable for every guy who died? So the book would have exactly 16,592 syllables. Or in other words, exactly 976 haiku. That's the whole book. And so every page reminds us of the soldier who died. At the beginning of every chapter reminds us of how many died that week. So week 1 of 68 was 184 guys. So that was kind of an interesting challenge for me to figure out how to do it. I didn't think it would work. So there's the book. I already showed it to you. It just came out a couple weeks ago. So back to this question of why is it worth reading? It's one thing. It's one good reason to read is so you won't be stupid. And a writer I know says that a good reason to have school is because we don't like living with stupid people. And we need all kinds of people to help our country do what it does. So it's not like you have to be a teacher or an English teacher, but you got to be something. And whatever you do is going to require reading. And if you want to improve yourself in your job, if you want to move beyond just where the starting position is, reading's a part of that, even if it's reading the manual for what you do in work. So stupidity is a bad thing. Something that C.S. Lewis says is that reading helps us see things in a bigger picture. Because some people see stuff only one way. I don't know what your parents are like, but my dad, when I was in high school, he had one idea. And he couldn't see past things. And so when I was in high school was when some people had really long hair. In my dad's view, if a guy had long hair, he was a hippie. If he was a hippie, he was useless. And it was just like, there was no discussion. It was like, long hair, he's useless. But people who know how to read, start realizing that life is more complicated than that. It's not just one thing. It's learning how to see things in different ways. So this guy, C.S. Lewis, this famous English writer, is talking about how when we become readers, we can start thinking outside our own selves, which is a good thing. So I'm going to give you a test that I think is a kind of reading test, but it really has to do with perception. Because good readers can perceive things that weak readers can't. So pay attention. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to answer 2 questions. And the picture is just going to go pretty fast. So this is just testing your powers of observation, which I think is a skill that comes from reading. So what's the first question? Is this a picture of a man or a woman? The second question, is the man or woman wearing glasses? So this is a yes-no question. That's a man or woman. Ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, man or woman? Woman? Wearing glasses? Everybody agree with that? A woman without glasses. You've got really good eyes. You can see that.
Man with glasses.
A man with glasses. Okay, here's the second part of the test. So here's another picture. So I'm going to show you a picture of a word as it moves across the screen. So what's the word? And is it written in cursive? You know what cursive is, like your signature. Or is it written in block letters like printing? You ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. So what's the word? Liar. Cursive or block? Cursive. Okay, so now let's think about how perceptive we... That's cool that you can see that, because that goes pretty fast. So let's think about how readers can see things in more than one way. What do you see here? Is it liar? Or is it a man wearing glasses? Or a woman with contacts?
It's both.
It's actually both, right? And once you see it one way, so if you think of it, this is the guy's nose, here's his eyes, down here, neck, mouth. Or if you look at it sideways, you can see how it says liar. But people who are readers, well, the more we read, the more perceptive we are with reading stuff. It's harder for people to fool us. And I can guarantee you, if you want to go get a loan or other kinds of documents, sometimes that paperwork is designed to fool you into something that's not going to be for your good. But if you're a careful reader, you can perceive differences and you can see things that somebody doesn't want you to see, because you've learned how to read between the lines. You've learned how to notice things that other people are missing. So there's lots of help to become a better reader. School is a big help, even though it's painful sometimes or boring sometimes. Ultimately, the goal of school is the goal that you have, is to become a better person. And there's a great website called Guys Read, where this guy, John Cheska, who knows all, he was a kid who grew up not liking to read, suggests books for all kinds of people who don't like to read. And they're not just novels, they're books about things, too, that are worth reading. So it's a great website. So here's some books that I personally think are worth reading, and not because they're great literature, but because they're worth reading. So this one's written by a guy in Utah. The movie just came out. He lives up here in Jordan. Anyway, there's all kinds of books, fiction and nonfiction, adventure stories. Tony Hawk, if you're a skater, he's got several books out. So there's lots of stuff for you. So here's the kind of the final thing about, to me, why reading matters. And this applies to you and to me and anybody else. But all of us, you know, if you're standing still, it's like you're dead, right? If you never change or grow, then what? What kind of life is that? So all of us are like right here at different stages of life, including me. But there's something more that we want. Most of us want something more than we are right now. So the question is, how do we get there? And I would suggest that it takes some courage to give it a shot, to make that leap across there. But that reading and other kinds of things you can learn in school can give you that bridge that helps you make it across that leap into what you want to become. And I can guarantee you that more than half of you right now, whatever you think you want to become, in 10 years you'll be something else. That certainly was the case in my life. You just can't know everything right now. But what you can do is prepare yourself so when that leap comes, when you're ready to have the opportunity, it's kind of a scary leap, you're ready to make it. And if you're a good reader, you'll be better prepared to make that leap when that opportunity comes your way. So I would just conclude with, great people are great readers, and don't miss a chance to be great. So take the chance in class to read when you don't have to, read websites, read newspapers, magazines, books. There's lots of stuff to read, and it all helps you become a better thinker and person. Thanks.
Any questions?